Here we are in week 6. Sorry if the light's a little red. I'm trying to adjust the tint through the Logitech camera so the light isn't quite so bright out of my right side there. Maybe I just need to hang up an old hippie poster or a tie-dye print or something over that. I don't know. Anyway, week 6, got a lot to talk about. Just like to introduce the topics we'll be discussing here in week 6. Jumping firmly into the 60s at this time. First with movies, the movie Bonnie and Clyde came out in 1967, the summer of love. But Bonnie and Clyde was not about love. It was the romanticization of the gangster couple, a true story of a gangster couple, Clyde Barrow and Bonnie, what's her name, during the Depression era, during the 30s. But this movie really helped to start the career of Gene Hackman, of Faye Dunaway, the beautiful Faye Dunaway, what a beautiful woman, Warren Beatty, and also one of my favorite actors, Gene Wilder, famous for his portrayal in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, not the goofy remake with Johnny Depp, man. Anyway, Gene Wilder, his movie debut in this movie. But why is Bonnie and Clyde so important? Because this is the time right when the Hays Code was falling apart. Remember, the Hays Code was the censorship code. Your movie had to be submitted to the Hays Code, and they would censor it. They would tell you to add parts, delete parts, and indeed the movie Blackboard Jungle that I keep returning to, the very first section where we have the writing at the beginning saying, with the juvenile delinquency, we hope this will not happen in your community. This is a warning. That was added by the Hays Code. Also the scene in the middle of Blackboard Jungle where the teacher, Mr. Dadier, goes back to the good school. That was added by the Hays Code. But that was the 50s. This is the 60s. By this time the Hays Code is breaking down, can no longer handle the new morals of society, and movies such as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf last week really pushed this along. So now we have Bonnie and Clyde in 1967. Bonnie and Clyde was so groundbreaking in the fact that it was considered very violent for its time. The last scene where Bonnie and Clyde, and I believe we have a clip of this where Bonnie and Clyde get shot and get killed, was the most graphically violent gunning down scene ever in a movie at this time. The director of the movie that you'll hear an interview with claims that because of the violence of the Vietnam War being shown on television news every night, we were in the middle of the Vietnam War at this time, 1967, really desensitized the American audience to violence and allowed him to get away with this violence. So the Hays Code is breaking down, and now we have the new system, the new GMRX system, the voluntary rating system put in effect by the Motion Picture Academy. GMRX, general, mature, restricted, and X-rated. And sometimes you'll hear this as GPMX or GPRX. Those are incorrect. It is GMRX. I think I've said it incorrectly a few times myself. GMRX. We've got a little video about GMRX, and we still have the rating system today. Of course, it has morphed into PG-13, R, and NC-17. So remember, X was turned into NC-17. Very important for you to know. X was gotten rid of because it was taken over by the porn industry, and now NC-17 is what X used to be. So, movies. Violence in the Vietnam War, the romanticized gangster. First truly romanticized gangster movie, which there have been many of since then. Soul music. Soul music really comes to its own in the 60s, especially with Motown Records. Motown Records started in 1960 by Berry Gordy, a Detroit automaker, worked in the auto factories and was a fledgling songwriter, and started hanging around with Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. I believe Smokey Robinson wrote My Girl, My Girl, My Girl, recorded by the Temptations. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Smokey was one of the big songwriters at Motown Records. Berry Gordy starts Motown Records, and of course they had millions of smash hits, well, hundreds of million selling smash hits, I should say, by the Supremes. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Temptations, my favorites, the Four Tops. I love the Four Tops. Martha and the Vandellas, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Marvin Gaye, heard it through the grapevine. The Four Tops, what a great group. Bernadette, Standing in the Shadows of Love, Reach Out, I'll Be There, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, The Same Old Song. Boy, these are just great songs. I really love those guys. Now, some people say, some and we've discussed this a little bit in some of the classes with some of the MTV material. Some people say that the Motown stuff was a little bit cleaned up, a little bit sterilized, was really projected for the white audience. And indeed, I grew up in Detroit and really remember Motown very vividly on the radio stations. The radio stations would play a good mix of white music and black music, but mostly Motown music. So it was a bit sterilized. But then on the other side of the coin, we've got Motown over here, and we've got something else over on the other side. We have Atlantic Records, started by Ahmet Ertegun, who was a Turkish immigrant. Well, I wasn't really an immigrant. He was the son of a political. Who was he? I believe his father was Ahmet Ertegun's father was the Turkish ambassador to the United States. Ahmet Ertegun starts Atlantic Records. Really got into the American jazz of the 50s and Ray Charles, John Coltrane, Ray Charles, but then in the 60s really dived into soul music and Atlantic Records recorded Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, and then some of the funkier, more southern groups, Booker T and the MGs, and Sam and Dave, Rufus Thomas. Many people consider the Atlantic soul music, especially Wilson Pickett, Otis Redding, to be much earthier, much funkier, much more soulful than the Motown. But it's really two sides of the same coin, So black music really comes into its own. And a third stream, we have to mention, Motown, first stream with the Supremes, Temptations, Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, forgot to mention Stevie Wonder, another great songwriter. Our second stream, Atlantic Records, funkier, earthier, Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, the great Wilson Pickett, Mustang Sally, funky Broadway, Land of a Thousand Dances, and the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin. So that we have the two streams. The third stream represented by one man alone who was not on either Motown or Atlantic, and that was the great James Brown. Videos by all those people, lots of videos this week. Be sure you watch all those music videos by all those great performers. Reading, be sure you're staying up on the reading. Our anti-rock book, chapters 12 and 13, discussing music moving into the 60s and more trouble with the Stones. 1969, the Altamont concert. We'll be discussing Altamont quite a bit next week. The Altamont concert in 1969, at the end of the summer, at the end of the Rolling Stones summer, 1969 spring and summer tour. I actually saw the Rolling Stones on that tour in Phoenix in 1969. And they ended the tour with a free concert in Altamont, California, and there was violence and death at the concert in 1969. Boy, the 60s are over. More on that next week, but that is in your reading for this week from Anti-Rock. Also, the Gula book. Be sure you're reading Gula, whatever chapter it is. Chapter 6, I believe. Anyway, and we will be discussing some very specific incorrect attacks on people, such as the ad hominem attack, the sacred cow attacks, attacking something that we all hold very sacred. Boy, you're putting down patriotism when you do that. That's a sacred cow. Easy to attack somebody on things like patriotism or religion. Politicians do it all the time. And our second to last section, for most of us, Ken Kesey and LSD. Ken Kesey was a young man who was a fledgling writer, worked in 1959 at a mental ward where the government was doing experiments with LSD and other psychedelic drugs before these drugs were known and illegal. Ken Kesey got a chance to do these drugs, got very excited about them, and found someone who would help him make these drugs and distributed LSD to many, many people throughout California and all across the United States in his very famous acid tests. And as he drove his psychedelic bus across the United States, his bus named Further, and gave acid tests, and also influenced the Grateful Dead and the Hells Angels, who hung around with Ken Kesey and his LSD doing merry pranksters. Really changed American society in the 60s. If we can look at two incidences that really changed American society, probably more than anything, and led us into this psychedelic, drug-addled hippie revolution in the 60s. Ken Kesey and his merry pranksters with LSD, and also the Beatles coming over, and also the Beatles adopting LSD. And huge change in society, the biggest change in youth culture probably ever in the world, fueled by LSD. Ken Kesey had a very famous saying, "You're either on the bus or off the bus." He loved to say that. You're on the bus or off the bus, kind of like you get it or you don't get it. You're on board or you're not on board. You got to sink or swim. So that's a great Ken Kesey saying. You're on the bus or you're off the bus. please try and stay on the bus for this class. Very important. But I digress. Get those online discussion forums and quizzes done. Lots of people missing points on that. Many people are down to B's and C's. Check those grades. Get over there on your left side button and check your grades. If you want to know your percentage, please email me. But I digress. And our last section for our discussion forum, we'll be discussing Katy Perry and Elmo and her famous appearance, or infamous appearance on Sesame Street a couple of years ago, and also a video from Anderson Cooper 360 and kind of the battle of the conservative versus the liberal. And they throw around some stuff on there, and you have to decide if they have valid arguments, or are they using the sacred cow or the ad hominem arguments from your Gula book. So Katy Perry and Elmo on a play date. And finally, last but not least, now hybrid people, Monday night hybrid people, you can now go to the refrigerator and get yourself a cold pickle. Because this does not concern you. This is only for the fully online people, because we do have a slightly different grading. Fully online people, listen up. Our first paper is posted in this week 6 assignment folder. Will be due in 9 days, a week from Thursday. Not Tuesday, but on Thursday. A week from this coming Thursday. So be sure you're looking at that information. Rock and roll history, you have 3 topics to choose from. Late 50s rock and roll, the first explosion of rock, what happened there, why did it die out. Second topic, Beatles, why the Beatles, why were they so popular, why were they so influential in their early years. You have to discuss their early years and this combination between Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Sometimes they worked together, sometimes they butted heads, but created one of the greatest bodies of popular music ever created. And the third topic you can choose one of these 3. You can discuss soul music, Motown versus Atlantic. And I've already given you some good information on that. So we're up to about 12 minutes. That's probably as much as most of you can stand. And I'll plan to see you around. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.